Hello, hi friends. Hope you are doing well. And today's topic is what is Active Directory Domain Services. That's called AD DS also. In my last video, I explained what is Active Directory, and today's topic is about what is Active Directory Domain Services. So this is a mostly used component inside the Active Directory AD DS, and in this video I'm going to give you the complete knowledge about the AD DS. So let's get started. So I divided this tutorial into three parts: the overview of ADDS, ADDS physical components, and the ADDS logical components. So after this video, you will be expert to understand what is ADDS physical components and the logical components, and really something more in that. That will be a in-depth knowledge. Now let's see what will be inside the module 1. So module 1 will be covering up the protocol, authentication, authorization, and why we need to deploy the ADDS, centralized networking management, installing ADDS, overview ADDS and the DNS, and the ADDS components. So let's start with the module 1. Now, here is the module 1. The first point was a protocol. So protocol, what are the protocol used for ADDS? So it's a lightweight directory access protocol that's called a LDAP as well. And that's the version is a minimum version is X.500 standard based on the TCP, a method for accessing, searching, modifying a directory service, and it's a client server module. So LDAP is the main protocol which is used for the ADDS. Now, what is the authentication? So authentication is the process to verifying a user identity on a network. So when you are trying to access any server or any network things, then it will verify your username and the password. Now here is a authentication includes the two component. One is interactive logon, grant access to the local computer, and second is a network authentication. So grant access to a network resources. So authentication having two components. Now, what is the authorization? So authorization is a process to verifying that an authorized user has the permission to perform that action or not. Suppose you try to authenticate some data to access it, but are you authorized to access it? So that is the meaning of the authorization. So authorization is a process to verify that the authenticate user which is trying to access that has permission to perform the action or not. Now, so inside this authorization, we have some components like security principal are issued as security identifiers when the account is created. User account is issued security token during the authentication that include the user SID and the related group SIDs. And our shared resources on the network include the access control list, that is called ACL, that defined can be the access to the resources. And now here is the security token is compared against the directory access control. EDCL on the resources access is granted or denied. So these are four components for the authorization process. Now, why deploy the ADDS? Like why we need the ADDS? So ADDS provide the centralized system for managing your users, computer, and other resources on the network. So you can manage to your user, computers, printers, and the other component which is connected on the network, that you can manage the centralized. That's why we need the ADDS, Active Directory Domain Controller. Now here is a ADDS feature. So centralized directory, it will provide you the centralized directory. So from single one resource you can access every resources, user, computers from the like a centralized directory. From one place you can access the another computer if it is connected over the network. Now it's provide the single sign-on access, it's integrated security, and it's provide the scalability, and it's a common management interface. So common management interface in the sense is from the one place you can access the any of resources connected over the network. So that's why we needed the ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. Now let's see the centralized network management. So ADDS provide a centralized network management by providing a single location, the start of the tool managing the user and the group accounts. And the next is sign single location to assigning a access on the shared network resources, the directory services of the ADDS enabled application, and the option to configuring security policies and deploy to all users and computers, and the group policies to manage the computer and the security settings. And now so this is for the centralized network explanation that will help you to crack the interview and to make it your knowledge perfectly. Now here is a next slide, requirement of installing a ADDS. So what you need and when you are installing a ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, so you need a TCP IP, so configuring a appropriate TCP IP and the DNS server address. You need a credential, so to need to install a new ADDS for us, you need to be a local administrator on the server. To install the additional domain controller and the existing domain, you need to be the member of the domain group. So suppose if you are installing a new ADDS server, then you need a local administrator. If you are adding this domain inside under another domain, like a to be part of a child domain or to be a part of a forest domain, inside the forest domain, so you need a domain group membership inside the forest domain. Now, what else you needed? You need a domain name system, DNS, that is called a DNS, domain name system infrastructure. To verify that the DNS infrastructure in a place, when you install the ADDS, you can include the DNS server installation if needed. So if you have not installed the DNS server, you must need to install a DNS server with your Active Directory installation. So when you create a new domain, a DNS delegation is created automatically during the installation process. So that means is when you are installing your a Active Directory server, the DNS will be part of your installation. Or you can create a DNS in a separate server also. So whatever you like it. So creating a DNS delegation require the credential that have the permission to update the parent DNS zone. So that means if we are having a another DNS zone, so it need a permission to update the parent DNS zones. Now overview of ADDNS and ADDS and the DNS. So ADDS required a DNS infrastructure. When you are installing Active Directory domain services, you need a DNS, like domain name service infrastructure. So to installing a ADDS, obviously you need a DNS. Now, ADDS domain name must be the domain names, like you should have a domain name for that. ADDS domain controller record must be registered in the DNS to enabling the other domain controller and the client computer to locate the domain controller. So all these things are comes under your the installation process. DNS zone can stored in a active ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, as Active Directory integrated zones. So this is all about explanation your ADDS and DNS. Now the component overview. So we have two types of component, physical component and the logical component. So under the physical component, data store, domain controller, global catalog server, and read-only server controller, that is called RODC. And if we talk about the logical components, so that will come partitions, schema, domains, domains tree, forest, site, and OU. So in my coming slides, I will be explaining each of these components, your physical and the logical components. Let's move it to the next module. So one module is done, and let's move it to the next module, overview of the ADDS physical component. So domain controller will be covering up in this domain is this module, domain controller, global catalog server, data store, replication, and the sites. So let's understand what is the domain controller. A domain controller is a server with the ADDS server role installed that has the specifically been promoted to a domain controller. So what are the domain controller components it's having? Host a copy of the ADDS directory store, provide authentication and authorization services, replicate data to the other domain controller in the domain and the forest, and allow administrator to access the manage user and accounts in a network resources. And this RODC you can use greater than 2008 servers. So you need to check here the server version. And I hope so nowadays everyone is having more than 2K8. Now the global catalog server. So global catalog server are the domain controller that also store a copy of a global catalog. Now, the logical inside that we have a global catalog, so contains a copy of ADDS object in the forest that include only some of the attribute in the each components in the forest, and improve efficiency of the object search in the providing the unnecessary referral to the domain controller, and require for a user to log on to the domain controller to a domain. Now, if we see what is the ADDS data store, what type of data it will store. So the ADDS data store contain data database files and process that store in the store and manage the directory information for users, services, and the applications. So ADDS stored data consists the ntds.dit file, and it stored the default into the system root directory. That folder calls ntds folder on the all domain controllers. So wherever you will go in the domain controller, you can find out a system root directory and the ntds folder. So is the accessible only through a domain controller process and the protocols. So now what is the ADDS replication? So ADDS replication copy all updates from the ADDS database to the other domain controller in a domain or the forest. So ADDS replication, how it will work, ensure the all domain controller have the same information. So that is the ADDS replication responsibility to be make sure that all domain controller having the same information, and uses the multi-master replication model and can be managed by creating a ADDS site as well. So the ADDS replication topology is created automatically as the new domain controller are added to the domain. So you no need to do it manually anything. It will automatically replicate all these data. Now what are the sites? So an ADDS site is used to represent a network segment where all domain controller are connected to by the fast and the reliable connections. Basically, we are creating a site to represent the network segment. Like your location wise, you can create based on your subnet or based on your IP range. You can create your the sites to recognize your computer where it is located. So that's why we need the sites. So sites are like associated with the IP subnet, used to manage the replication traffic. It used to manage the client logon traffic. It used to the site aware applications such as a distributed file system, that's called the DFS, or the exchange server. So used to assign a group policy object to all users and the computer in a company location. So that's called sites. Now the domain is looks like this. So if you have the domain controller and the another domain controller, so data replication will happen. Your user, computer, and the groups all will comes under the domain and even the policy. So if we give the definition, so units of the replication are maintained by the domain controller and the million of the object. I created one more slide about the domains that I will explain you in the coming slide. So trees looks like something. Inside a domain, you have the subdomain that's called a tree. So if you have suppose a domain.local and you have added one more domain inside your domain.local, so that will called a domain tree. And here is like a secure.domain.local. So this is a subdomain for this, or you can call this is a forest, and or this is the parent and this is a child domain. Now here is the module 3 AD DS schema. The your the basic, trust, and AD DS object installation and management. So all these five topics I will be covering up in module 3. So let's get started. What is the AD DS schema? What it does? So AD DS schema define every type of object can be stored in the directory. So AD DS schema is responsible to define the data, the directory which is the object which are stored in the directory, and enforce rules regarding the object creation and the configurations. So the object type can be a class object or the attribute object. So we have the two types of object, class object and the attribute object. If we talk about the function, so what object can be created in the directory and the information can be attached on the object. So that's how we can differentiate the class and the objects. And the example I can say, the class object is your user and the class object is a computer. So computer and the user comes under the class object, and attributes comes under this property, like a display name for that user or the computer. So that's called like a schema. Now let's understand the domain. So domain are used to group and the manage the object in the organization. So whenever you are creating any AD server, you should have at least one domain name. And what is called the domain? So domains are used to manage or used to group and the manage object in the organization. So it will manage your all the objects like your user, computer, laptop, desktop, printers, everything under comes in that. So it will manage or it will do the grouping as well to easily manage your identities or the objects. So domains and administrative boundaries for applying the policies to a group of the object. So your domain can be apply the administrative boundaries and to the objects. A replication boundary for replicating data in between the domain controllers. So domain is the responsible to replicating the boundaries to the other domain controllers. And authentication and authorization boundaries are provided to way limit to the scope and the access resources. Now, what is the tree? So tree, a domain is a hierarchy of the domains of the AD. So this is a little different. A domain tree is a hierarchy of the domain in the ADDS. Like you have a consto domain, you have a na.consto domain, and you have a emia.consto domain. So this is like a hierarchy. This is like a tree for the domain. So inside the consto domain, you have the two domains. It's a emia.consto, and you have the another domain is a na.consto domain. It that can called like a forest domain, and this is the child domain. So under the forest domain, forest called a consto.com, and this is your the child domain inside your forest. So all domain in the tree, what it does, share the continuous namespace in the parent's domain, can have the additional child domain like this. It's a child domain, and by default created two transitive trust with the other domains. So it will create a transitive trust with the other domains as well. Now let's see what is the forest. So a forest is a collection of one or more domain tree. So if you have one or more domain tree, that is called like a forest domain. A forest is a collection of one or more domains. Now what the forest will do? So forest is a common schema, share the common configuration partition, share a common global catalog to enable searching, enable trust between all domains in the forest, and share the enterprise admin and schema admin groups. So that's what's the forest do. What is the organization unit? So that we will be seeing this in the practical session. What is the OU, or what is the user, what is the computers and the groups? So it's OU, that's called the organization unit. So OU are the Active Directory containers that contain user, group, computers, and the other OUs. So like inside the OU, you can create you can add users. It can contain the users. It can contain the groups. It can contain the computers and the other things. So group is basically when you add multiple users and want to save in a or you want to grouping that, or you want to create a groups for user computers and all. So you can create a OU, that is called organization unit. OU are used to, why we are using the OU, represent your organization hierarchy and logically, manage a collection of object and consistent way, delegate permission to a administrator group to the objects, and applying the policies. So that's why we are doing the OU. Trust. So what is the trust? So trust provide a mechanism to user to gain the access to resource in another domain. So when you have the two types of domain, you need to create a trust in between two domains so that data sharing can happen in one domain to the another domain. That's why we need a trust. If you have the two domains, different domains, and you don't create a trust, so one domain user cannot access the data from the another domain. So that's why we needed trust. So trust is a two types. It's a direction and the transitive. So direction is the trust direction flow from the trust domain to the trusted domain. So data flow will happen in this one domain to the another domain. If you have the trust, then you can access the one domain to the another domain. So it's like the trust direction flow from the trusting domain to the trusted domain. So you have the one trust domain and the trusting domain where you are creating a trust. Transitive is like the trust relationship is extended beyond it two domains trust to include the other domain trust. So when you have like a one domain and the another domain, and suppose you have a one domain here and the child domain, so in between you can create a transitive trust. So all domain in a forest, forest trust all domain in the forest. Trust can be extended the outside of the forest as well. So that's I will be creating a in-depth video to explain more about the trust. What is the ADDS objects? What are the objects come under the ADDS? So users to enable network resources access for a user, and this is inet org person, the similar to the user account, and used for the compatibility with the directory services, content, group, computer, printer, share folder. So all these are the objects in your Active Directory AD DS. So guys, now thank you so much for watching this video. In my coming video, I will show you how you can create or install the Active Directory domain services in your server. So guys, thank you for watching this video. See you soon in my next video.